The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Sergeant William Chen adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what he thought would be another routine day. The red tunic, polished brass buttons, and tall black bearskin hat were part of a tradition that stretched back centuries. He had been a royal guard for 12 years, standing motionless for hours while tourists snapped photos and children tried to make him smile. William's horse, Thunder, stood perfectly still beside him. The magnificent black stallion was trained for ceremony, bred for discipline, and had never shown emotion during public duties. Thunder's dark eyes remained forward, his breathing steady, as hundreds of visitors passed by each day. The horse had been William's partner for 5 years, and together they represented the unwavering strength and dignity of the crown. On this particular Tuesday, the palace was expecting a special group of visitors. Mrs. Sarah Martinez, a teacher from Sunshine Special Needs School, had organized a field trip for her students. She had been planning this visit for months, saving money, and getting permissions to bring 25 children with various disabilities to see the changing of the guard ceremony. The children arrived on a bright yellow school bus, their excited voices filling the usually quiet morning air. Some walked with assistance, others used wheelchairs, and a few had sensory processing disorders that made loud noises and crowds challenging. Mrs. Martinez and her team of helpers worked carefully to keep everyone together and comfortable. 8-year-old Emma was among the group. Born with Down syndrome, she had an infectious smile and loved animals more than anything else in the world. Her bedroom at home was filled with stuffed horses, and she spent hours drawing pictures of ponies and reading books about stable life. This trip to see the real royal guards and their horses was her dream come true. As the children gathered near the guard post, Emma broke away from the group. Her small legs carried her closer to where William and Thunder stood at attention. Mrs. Martinez noticed immediately and started to call her back, worried about disturbing the ceremony. Emma stopped just a few feet from Thunder, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never seen such a beautiful, powerful horse up close. The stallion's coat gleamed in the sunlight, and his strong muscles showed years of careful training and care. Without thinking, Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, worn stuffed horse she carried everywhere. "Hello, big horse," she whispered softly, holding up her toy. "This is Sparkles. She wanted to meet you." William, trained to remain completely still and silent during duty, felt something unexpected stir in his chest. Through his peripheral vision, he could see the little girl with her innocent face and genuine love for his horse. He had witnessed thousands of interactions during his years of service, but something about this moment felt different. Thunder, who had been trained to ignore all distractions, began to show signs of interest. His ears moved slightly forward, and his nostrils flared gently as he caught the scent of the child nearby. The horse had never broken protocol before, but something about Emma's pure joy and gentle approach seemed to reach him. Mrs. Martinez approached carefully, not wanting to startle the horse or interfere with the guard's duties. She had prepared her students for this visit, explaining that the guards couldn't talk or move and that they needed to be respectful and quiet. But she also knew that Emma's love for horses was so strong that it might be difficult to keep her at a distance. "Emma, sweetie, we need to step back and give the horse space," Mrs. Martinez said gently. Before Emma could respond, something remarkable happened. Thunder, maintaining his perfect posture, lowered his great head just slightly toward the little girl. It was a movement so small that most people wouldn't have noticed, but Emma saw it immediately. Her face lit up with pure happiness. "He likes Sparkles," she exclaimed in a whisper that carried more joy than any shout. William felt his heart racing beneath his rigid uniform. In all his years of service, he had never seen Thunder break even the smallest bit of protocol. The horse's training was absolute, his discipline perfect. Yet here was this gentle giant, a war horse bred for ceremony and strength, showing tenderness to a child with special needs. Other children in the group began to notice what was happening. Those who could walk moved closer, while others in wheelchairs were pushed forward by their helpers. The usual tourist crowd seemed to sense that something special was occurring and stepped back to give the school group more space. 9-year-old Marcus, who had autism and rarely spoke to strangers, pointed excitedly at Thunder. "Horse is friendly," he said clearly, which surprised his teacher who had been working with him on communication for years. Lily, a 10-year-old girl who used a wheelchair due to cerebral palsy, had tears of joy in her eyes as she watched Emma's interaction with Thunder. She had always felt different from other children, but seeing this magnificent horse show gentleness to her friend made her feel included in something magical. William struggled with his training and his human instincts. Every fiber of his military discipline told him to remain perfectly still and silent, but watching these children experience such pure joy awakened something in him that had been buried under years of formal protocol. He began to understand that sometimes the most powerful service came not from rigid adherence to rules, but from responding to human need with compassion. Thunder seemed to sense the emotional current running through the group. The horse's dark eyes softened as he looked at the children gathered around him. His training told him to ignore distractions, but his ancient instincts as a herd animal were responding to the vulnerability and innocence of these young humans who needed protection and kindness. As more children approached, Mrs. Martinez watched in amazement. She had brought her students here hoping they would enjoy seeing the ceremony, but she never expected this level of interaction. The other royal guards stationed nearby began to take notice as well, though they maintained their positions and silence. The moment stretched on, creating a bridge between the formal world of military ceremony and the simple, pure world of children who saw only beauty and possibility. Emma continued to hold up her stuffed horse, talking softly to Thunder about all the things she wanted to show him. The other children watched in wonder, each of them feeling touched by the magic of this unexpected connection. This was just the beginning of a day that would change everyone involved, challenging everything they thought they knew about duty, protocol, and the power of simple human kindness to transform even the most formal traditions. Captain James Morrison had been watching the scene unfold from his position near the main gate. As the commanding officer of the Royal Guard unit, he was responsible for maintaining discipline and ensuring that all protocols were followed exactly. He had built his career on precision, order, and unwavering adherence to centuries-old traditions, but what he was witnessing challenged everything he thought he knew about his role as a leader. Thunder continued to show gentle interest in Emma and the other children, while William remained at attention, clearly struggling with the conflict between his training and his human compassion. The other guards on duty had noticed the situation, and Captain Morrison could see the question in their eyes. What should they do? Emma had now been joined by several other children from her group. 10-year-old Jamie, who had been in a car accident that left him with a traumatic brain injury, had been silent and withdrawn for most of the school trip. But seeing Thunder's gentle behavior toward Emma had awakened something in him. He approached slowly, using his walker for support. "Can I pet him?" Jamie asked in a quiet voice, looking hopefully at the magnificent horse. Mrs. Martinez looked uncertain. She understood the importance of the ceremony and didn't want to cause problems, but she also saw how much this meant to her students. These children face challenges every day that most people couldn't imagine, and seeing them light up with joy was something she treasured. Thunder, as if understanding the boy's question, took a small step closer. The movement was barely noticeable to untrained eyes, but William felt it immediately. His horse, his disciplined partner who had never wavered in 5 years of service, was making a choice to connect with these children. Captain Morrison made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew him. Instead of immediately intervening to restore order, he quietly radioed his second-in-command, Lieutenant Sarah Wells. "Sarah, I need you to discreetly redirect tourist foot traffic around the East Guard post. We have a special situation developing that requires some space," he said calmly into his radio. Lieutenant Wells, who had been watching from another position, understood immediately. She had noticed the interaction between Thunder and the children, and had been wondering how command would handle it. She began directing tourists to other viewing areas, explaining that they were conducting a special demonstration. Meanwhile, another member of Emma's group had joined the gathering. 12-year-old Alex, who had severe ADHD and usually struggled to focus on anything for more than a few minutes, stood completely still watching Thunder. His teacher aide, Ms. Rodriguez, was amazed to see him so calm and concentrated. "I've never Seen him this focused, she whispered to Mrs. Martinez. He's been having such a difficult week with his medication changes, but look at him now. Thunder seemed to sense Alex's need for calm. The horse's breathing became even more steady and rhythmic, creating a peaceful energy that seemed to settle the boy's usually restless spirit. Alex stepped forward and, without being asked, began to speak softly to the horse about his week at school, sharing feelings he rarely expressed to adults. William listened to every word, his heart breaking and healing at the same time. Through his years of military service, he had learned to compartmentalize his emotions, to focus on duty above all else. But these children were teaching him something about service that had nothing to do with following orders and everything to do with following his heart. Captain Morrison approached the group slowly, his ceremonial uniform pristine and his bearing commanding. The teachers tensed, expecting him to end the interaction and move the children along. Instead, he stopped a respectful distance away and observed. Thunder noticed the captain's approach and, for a moment, seemed ready to return to full ceremonial posture. But Emma, unaware of the significance of the officer's presence, continued her gentle conversation with the horse. "My mom says you're very brave," she told Thunder, still holding her stuffed horse. "Sparkles wants to be brave like you when she grows up." Something in the innocence of her words affected Captain Morrison deeply. He had spent 30 years in military service, 15 of them with the Royal Guard. He had met presidents and prime ministers, had stood at attention during state funerals and royal weddings, had maintained discipline through every kind of weather and circumstance. But he had never encountered anything quite like this moment. 13-year-old Maria, who used a communication device due to her cerebral palsy, had been wheeled closer by her aide. She pressed buttons on her device and a computerized voice spoke for her. "Beautiful horse, thank you for being gentle." Thunder turned his head slightly toward the sound, his dark eyes showing recognition and understanding. The horse had been trained to ignore all sounds and distractions, but Maria's electronic voice seemed to reach him in a way that touched something deeper than training. Mrs. Martinez watched in amazement as more of her students began to open up. Kevin, who usually became overwhelmed in new environments due to his autism, was standing peacefully near Thunder, making soft clicking sounds that seemed to calm both him and the horse. Patricia, whose anxiety often made field trips difficult, was smiling more broadly than her teacher had seen in months. Captain Morrison realized he was witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. The discipline and training that made the Royal Guards famous wasn't being abandoned. It was being transformed into something deeper and more meaningful. He made another decision that surprised even himself. Instead of ending the interaction, he quietly signaled to his other guards to maintain their positions and continue the ceremony around this special moment. He understood instinctively that sometimes the highest form of service meant adapting to serve those who needed it most. Lieutenant Wells had successfully created a buffer zone around the group, and other tourists were watching from a respectful distance. Many of them had begun to realize that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment where rigid protocol was bending to accommodate human need and connection. Thunder, meanwhile, had begun to show even more signs of engagement with the children. His ears moved attentively as each child spoke, and his breathing seemed to adjust to create a calming presence for those around him. The horse was demonstrating an intelligence and emotional awareness that went far beyond his training. William felt a tear forming in his eye, hidden beneath the shadow of his ceremonial hat. In all his years of service, he had never been more proud to be a Royal Guard than he was in this moment. These children were teaching him and Thunder about courage, about the kind of bravery that came from being vulnerable and open to connection. The scene continued to develop as more children found the courage to approach Thunder. Each interaction was gentle and respectful, guided by the children's natural understanding of the horse's nature. They seemed to instinctively know that this was a special animal who deserved their kindness and respect. Captain Morrison watched it all, understanding that this moment would challenge him to rethink everything he thought he knew about leadership, service, and the true meaning of the Royal Guard's mission to serve and protect. When hearts override protocol, The interaction had been going on for nearly 20 minutes when something even more remarkable happened. Guard Robert Sullivan, stationed at the adjacent post with his horse Majesty, began to notice his own mount, showing signs of interest in the gathering of children. Majesty, a beautiful chestnut mare with 4 white socks, had been Sullivan's partner for 3 years. Like Thunder, she had been trained to perfection, never breaking character during the countless hours of ceremonial duty. But watching Thunder's gentle interaction with the children seemed to awaken something in her as well. 14-year-old Ben, who had spin a bifida and used a wheelchair, had been watching the scene with Thunder from a distance. His aide, Mr. Johnson, had positioned him where he could see everything clearly. Ben had always loved horses but had never been close enough to touch one. His physical limitations often made him feel left out of activities other children enjoyed. As, if sensing Ben's longing, Majesty began to shift her position slightly, turning her head toward where he sat in his wheelchair. Sullivan felt the movement immediately and understood what was happening. His mare, like Thunder, was choosing compassion over protocol. Captain Morrison, who had been quietly observing everything, made a decision that would have shocked his superiors if they had been present. He walked slowly to Ben's wheelchair and knelt down to the boy's level. "Would you like to meet Majesty?" he asked softly, his voice gentle despite his imposing uniform. Ben's eyes went wide with disbelief. "Really? I can meet her." "I think she would like that very much," Captain Morrison replied, looking toward Sullivan and giving him an almost imperceptible nod. Sullivan, understanding his captain's signal, allowed Majesty to take a few steps toward Ben's wheelchair. The mare moved with incredible grace and gentleness, as if she understood the precious cargo she was approaching. Mrs. Martinez watched in amazement as Captain Morrison personally guided this interaction. She had expected military precision and distant formality, but instead was witnessing military training being used in service of kindness and inclusion. Ben reached out tentatively, his hand shaking slightly with excitement and nervousness. Majesty lowered her beautiful head until Ben's fingers could touch her soft nose. The moment of contact was electric. Ben's face transformed with pure joy, and tears began streaming down his cheeks. "She's so soft," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "And warm." Majesty stood perfectly still, allowing Ben to run his fingers along her nose and forehead. The mare's dark eyes were gentle and patient, showing an emotional intelligence that went far beyond her training. Other children began to gather around Ben's wheelchair, and Majesty seemed to understand that she was now serving multiple young people who needed her gentleness. She positioned herself carefully so that several children could reach her, while remaining safely clear of Ben's wheelchair. 15-year-old Sarah, who had been quiet throughout most of the field trip due to her selective mutism, suddenly found her voice. "She's beautiful," she said clearly, speaking directly to Majesty. It was the first time her teachers had heard her speak to anyone outside her immediate family. The significance of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present. These children, who often faced a world that didn't accommodate their needs or understand, their differences were being met with acceptance and kindness by these magnificent animals and their handlers. Thunder, not to be outdone by Majesty's attention to the children, had begun to show even more engagement with Emma and the other children. Gathered around him, he gently nuzzled Emma's stuffed horse, which sent the little girl into giggles of delight. "Look, he likes Sparkles," Emma announced to everyone within hearing distance. "Thunder and Sparkles are friends now." William felt his resolve finally crack. Despite every regulation he had ever memorized, every protocol he had been trained to follow, he spoke. "Thunder thinks Sparkles is very brave," he said quietly, his voice barely audible but clear enough for Emma to hear. The little girl looked up at William with complete wonder. She had been told that the guards couldn't talk, but here was this tall, imposing man in his magnificent uniform speaking directly to her. "You can talk," she exclaimed in delight. "Thunder told you about Sparkles." "He did," William replied, feeling both terrified and liberated by his decision to break protocol. "He says she must be very special to have such a good friend." "Captain." Morrison heard the exchange and felt a mixture of pride and concern. William had just violated one of the most fundamental rules of Royal Guard duty. but he had done so in service of bringing joy to a child who deserved all the happiness the world could offer. The captain realized that he was facing a choice that would define not just this moment, but potentially his entire career. He could restore order immediately, ending this beautiful interaction and returning to standard protocol. Or he could allow this unprecedented display of humanity to continue, trusting that sometimes the highest service came from serving those who needed it most. 16-year-old Marcus, who had been standing quietly with his aide throughout the visit, suddenly stepped forward. Marcus had autism and intellectual disabilities that made communication challenging, but something about this moment seemed to unlock his ability to express himself. "Horses are good," he said clearly, looking directly at both Thunder and Majesty. "Guards are good too." His simple words carried a profound truth that resonated with everyone present. In their gentleness toward these children, both the horses and their handlers were demonstrating the very best of what service could be. Mrs. Martinez found herself fighting back tears as she watched her students experience this extraordinary kindness. These children spent so much of their lives navigating a world that often saw their disabilities before seeing their humanity. But here, they were being treated with the same respect and care that the royal guards typically reserved for heads of state and dignitaries. Lieutenant Wells, who had been managing the crowd from a distance, approached Captain Morrison with a quiet update. "Sir, word is spreading about what's happening here. We're getting requests from media, and there are quite a few people recording with their phones." Captain Morrison looked around and noticed that indeed, many tourists and bystanders were documenting this unusual ceremony. He realized that this moment was going to be remembered and discussed far beyond the palace walls. The captain made what would later be considered one of the most important decisions of his career. Instead of shutting down the interaction to avoid potential controversy, he chose to trust in the inherent rightness of what was happening. "Let them record," he said quietly to Lieutenant Wells. "Some things are too important to hide." As if sensing the weight of the decision, both Thunder and Majesty seemed to stand even taller and more proudly, understanding that their gentle service to these children was being witnessed and would be remembered. Word of the extraordinary interaction between the royal guards, their horses, and the special needs children began to spread throughout the palace complex within minutes. Palace staff members who had worked there for decades found reasons to walk past the East Guard post, drawn by reports of something unprecedented happening. Lady Catherine Pemberton, the palace's director of public relations, received an urgent call from her assistant about the situation. Her first instinct was to manage the potential crisis. Royal guards breaking protocol could create a public relations nightmare if not handled carefully. But when she arrived at the scene and saw what was actually taking place, her perspective changed entirely. 17-year-old Amanda, who had been in a wheelchair since birth due to spina bifida, was having her first real conversation with a horse. Thunder had somehow positioned himself so that she could easily reach his nose while remaining in her wheelchair. Amanda was telling Thunder about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian someday. "I want to help animals who are hurt," she explained, to the patient horse. "Maybe I can help horses like you feel better when they're sick." Thunder's response was to gently rest his nose near Amanda's hand, as if acknowledging her noble ambition. The gesture was so clearly intentional that even the most skeptical observer couldn't dismiss it as coincidence. William, having already broken his silence once, found himself drawn into more conversation with the children. When 8-year-old Tyler, who had cerebral palsy and speech difficulties, struggled to form words while trying to ask about Thunder's training, William knelt down to Tyler's level. "Thunder learned to be brave by practicing every day," William explained patiently, "just like you practice being brave every day." Tyler's face lit up with understanding and pride. His mother, who had accompanied the field trip as a volunteer, had tears streaming down her face as she watched her son being treated with such dignity and respect. Captain Morrison observed these interactions with growing amazement. He had spent his career believing that military discipline and emotional connection were mutually exclusive, but his guards were demonstrating that the highest form of discipline might actually be the wisdom to know when rules should bend in service of a greater good. At the adjacent post, Guard Sullivan and Majesty were creating their own magical moments with the children. 11-year-old Rebecca, who had Down syndrome and was usually shy around strangers, had somehow convinced Majesty to let her braid a small section of the mare's mane with a ribbon from her backpack. "Pretty horse needs pretty ribbons," Rebecca declared with the confidence of someone who understood beauty better than most adults. Sullivan watched in amazement as Majesty stood perfectly still, allowing this small girl to decorate her mane with bright pink ribbon. The mare seemed to understand that this act of beautification was Rebecca's way of showing love and respect. Mrs. Martinez had been documenting everything with her camera, understanding that these moments needed to be preserved not just for the children's families, but as proof that extraordinary kindness could emerge in the most unexpected places. 18-year-old David, who was on the autism spectrum and had been overstimulated by the crowds earlier in the day, found himself completely calm in Thunder's presence. The horse's steady breathing and gentle demeanor seemed to regulate David's own nervous system. "He makes the noise in my head quiet," David explained to his aide, describing how Thunder's presence helped with his sensory processing challenges. Lady Pemberton, who had initially come to manage a potential crisis, found herself instead witnessing what she would later describe as the most powerful demonstration of the Royal Guard's true mission she had ever seen. She quietly approached Captain Morrison. "James, you realize this is going to be international news within hours?" "I know," he replied calmly, "and I believe that's exactly as it should be." The captain's response surprised her. In all her years managing palace communications, she had rarely encountered military officers who welcomed public attention to their deviation from protocol. "The whole world needs to see this," Captain Morrison continued. "These children are teaching us something about service that we've forgotten in all our ceremony and tradition." Meanwhile, the interaction continued to evolve in unexpected ways. 9-year-old Carlos, who had been nonverbal due to autism, approached Thunder with a small drawing he had been working on during the bus ride. The picture showed a stick figure on a horse, surrounded by hearts and stars. Carlos held up the drawing to Thunder, and something extraordinary happened. The horse looked directly at the artwork, his ears forward with interest as if he was genuinely studying the child's creation. "For Thunder," Carlos said clearly, speaking his first words of the entire field trip. His teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, gasped in amazement. Carlos had been working with speech therapists for years, but something about this moment with Thunder had unlocked his ability to communicate. Thunder gently lowered his head toward the drawing, and Carlos carefully tucked it into the decorative cord on the horse's bridle. The image of this powerful war horse wearing a child's artwork like a badge of honor was captured by dozens of cameras and would soon become one of the most shared images on social media. Guard Peterson, stationed at a third post with his horse, Royal began to notice his mount showing signs of wanting to join the interaction. Royal, a gray gelding with unusually gentle temperament, had been watching the scenes at the other posts with obvious interest. A group of younger children who had been hesitant to approach the larger horses noticed Royal's attention and began to gravitate toward him. 7-year-old Sophie, who had been born with a rare genetic condition that affected her growth, looked tiny next to the magnificent horse. "He's so big," she whispered in awe, "but his eyes are kind." Peterson, inspired by his colleague's example, made his own decision to prioritize compassion over protocol. He allowed Royal to lower his head so that Sophie could reach him more easily. "Royal thinks you're very brave," Peterson told Sophie, echoing William's earlier words to Emma. The pattern was spreading from guard to guard, from horse to horse, creating a wave of kindness that transformed the entire ceremonial area. Lady Pemberton realized that she was witnessing history in the making. Instead of managing a crisis, she found herself documenting a moment that would redefine public understanding of what the Royal Guard represented. She pulled out her own phone and began recording, understanding that the palace would need its own official documentation of this unprecedented display of humanity within military tradition. 10-year-old Michael, who used a communication device due to his developmental disabilities, had been quietly observing everything from his wheelchair. As the interaction continued, he finally found the courage to approach Thunder with his device. He pressed several buttons and his electronic voice spoke. "Thank you for being nice to us. Most people don't understand us. The simple, profound statement hung in the air, capturing the essence of what was happening. These children, so often overlooked or misunderstood by society, were being seen, valued, and honored by some of the most elite military personnel in the country. As the extraordinary interaction continued into its second hour, palace officials began to take notice at the highest levels. Sir Edmund Hartwell, the chief of palace operations, received multiple reports about the unprecedented scenes taking place at the guard posts. His initial reaction was concern about security protocols and ceremonial standards being compromised. But as he made his way to witness the situation firsthand, he encountered something that challenged his decades of experience in royal service. 19-year-old Jennifer, who had cerebral palsy and used a power wheelchair, had become the unofficial photographer for her group. Despite her physical limitations, she had a remarkable eye for capturing beautiful moments. She was documenting every interaction between her classmates and the horses, understanding intuitively that these images would be treasured forever. "Can you move a little to the left?" she asked Guard Sullivan politely, wanting to get the perfect angle of Rebecca still braiding Majesty's mane. "The light is better there for the picture." Sullivan, amazed by her professional approach to photography, actually adjusted his position slightly to help her get the shot. It was another small break from protocol, but one that felt entirely natural, and Right Thunder, meanwhile, seemed to have appointed himself as the unofficial greeter for the entire group. Children who had initially been too nervous to approach were finding courage as they watched the gentle giant interact with their classmates. 6-year-old Danny, the youngest member of the group, had been overwhelmed by the size of the horses and the grandeur of the palace. But seeing Thunder's gentleness with the other children, he finally worked up the courage to approach. Danny had been born with multiple developmental delays, and his communication was limited to simple words and gestures. But when he stood before Thunder, something magical happened. The little boy began to sing a simple song he had learned in music therapy, a melody without words, just pure, innocent sound. Thunder's response was immediate and unmistakable. The horse's ears perked forward, and he lowered his head until he was at Danny's level. For several minutes, boy and horse existed in their own private world of music and connection. William, who had been moved to tears multiple times throughout the morning, found himself struggling to maintain any semblance of military composure. Watching Thunder respond to Danny's song with such obvious pleasure and attention was breaking down every wall he had built around his emotions during his years of service. Sir Edmund finally arrived at the scene, prepared to restore order and return the guards to proper protocol. But what he witnessed stopped him in his tracks. The entire area had been transformed into something resembling a therapeutic horse program. Children who had arrived shy and uncertain were now confident and joyful. Horses trained for military precision were demonstrating emotional intelligence and compassion that seemed almost human in its depth. Most remarkably, the guards themselves were showing a side of military service that the public rarely got to. Sisi, the deep humanity that motivated their dedication to serving others. 12-year-old Ashley, who had autism and rarely made eye contact with strangers, was having an intense conversation with Royal about her collection of horse figurines at home. She was looking directly into the horse's eyes as she spoke, making connection in a way that had eluded her with humans. "I have 47 horses on my shelf," she told Royal seriously, "but none of them are as beautiful as you." Guard Peterson found himself genuinely touched by her sincerity. "Royal says that your collection sounds amazing, and he would be honored to be number 48 if he could fit on your shelf." Ashley actually laughed at this suggestion, a sound so rare and delightful that everyone nearby stopped what they were doing to listen. Sir Edmund realized that he was witnessing something that transcended protocol and procedure. These guards were serving at the highest level, not by following rules, but by following their hearts in service of those who needed kindness most. Lady Pemberton had been quietly coordinating with the palace communications team, and they had made a remarkable decision. Instead of limiting media coverage of this unusual event, they were going to embrace it fully. "We're going to release an official statement celebrating this interaction," she informed Captain Morrison. The palace wants the world to know that this represents the very best of what the Royal Guard stands for. Captain Morrison felt a surge of relief and pride. His decision to allow the interaction to continue was being supported at the highest levels. 20-year-old Mark, who had intellectual disabilities and was the oldest member of the school group, had been quietly observing the entire morning. He understood more than many people gave him credit for, and he recognized the significance of what was happening. He approached Captain Morrison directly, a brave act that surprised his teachers. "Sir," he said formally, "thank you for letting the horses be kind to us. Most people think we're different in a bad way, but you let us be different in a good way." His words, simple but profound, captured the essence of what the morning had accomplished. These children weren't being treated as objects of pity or charity. They were being honored as full human beings, deserving of respect and kindness. "Captain." Morrison found himself deeply moved by Mark's understanding of the situation. "Mark, you and your friends have taught us something very important today. You've shown us what real courage looks like, and you've reminded us why we serve." The interaction was captured by Jennifer's camera, creating an image that would later hang in the palace's official portrait gallery. A captain of the Royal Guard, in deep conversation with a young man with disabilities, both of them treating each other with complete dignity and respect. As the morning progressed, something even more remarkable began to happen. Other palace staff members began to find reasons to visit the guard posts. Kitchen staff brought water for the children and treats for the horses. Maintenance workers paused in their duties to watch the interactions. Even some of the palace's senior administrators found themselves drawn to witness this unprecedented display of compassion. 15-year-old Maria, who had been using her communication device earlier, had progressed to speaking directly with Majesty about her dreams of becoming a teacher someday. "I want to teach little kids like me," she explained to the patient horse. "Kids who need extra help to learn things." Guard Sullivan found himself genuinely interested in her career aspirations. "Majesty thinks you would be an excellent teacher. She says the best teachers are the ones who understand what it's like to face challenges." The conversation between guard and student continued for several more minutes, covering topics that ranged from education to the importance of never giving up on dreams. Sir Edmund watched all of this with growing amazement. In his 30 years of palace service, he had witnessed countless ceremonial events, state visits, and royal occasions, but he had never seen anything that moved him more than watching these elite guards treat these special children with such genuine care and respect. He made a decision that would have long-lasting implications for palace protocol. This interaction would not be treated as an exception to be overlooked, but as a new standard to be celebrated and potentially repeated. The news crews that had been attracted by social media posts were now arriving at the palace gates. Rather than turning them away, Sir Edmund made the unprecedented decision to allow limited media access to document what was happening. "The world needs to see this," he told Lady Pemberton. "This is diplomacy and service at its finest, not between nations, but between human hearts." 13-year-old Kevin, who had been mostly nonverbal throughout his school years, surprised everyone by approaching Thunder with a question that demonstrated remarkable insight. "Do you get lonely standing so still all the time?" he asked the horse directly. Thunder's response was to nuzzle Kevin's shoulder gently, and William found himself answering for his partner. "Sometimes Thunder does get lonely," William admitted. "But today, meeting all of you, he feels like the luckiest horse in the world." Kevin smiled broadly, satisfied with the honest answer. It was the kind of genuine human connection that made all the protocol breaking worthwhile. The ripple effects of the morning's events were already beginning to spread beyond the palace walls. Videos and photos shared on social media were generating millions of views, comments, and shares. But more importantly, they were inspiring discussions about inclusion, compassion, and the true meaning of service. Dr. Helen Morrison, a child psychologist, who specialized in working with special needs children, happened to see the footage on the news. She immediately recognized the therapeutic value of what was happening at the palace. "What these guards and their horses are providing is worth more than months of traditional therapy," she would later tell reporters. They're giving these children the experience of being valued and respected by figures of authority and strength. As the official visit time came to an end, none of the children wanted to leave. The bonds that had been formed in just a few hours felt substantial and meaningful to everyone involved. Emma, who had started it all with her simple desire to introduce Sparkles to Thunder, approached William one final time. "Will Thunder remember us?" she asked, her small hand still clutching her stuffed horse. William knelt down to her level, his ceremonial uniform creaking as he moved. "Emma, Thunder will never forget this day, and neither will I. You and all your friends have made us better guards and better people." Emma hugged her stuffed horse tighter and then did something that surprised everyone. She offered Sparkles to Thunder as a gift. "Sparkles wants to stay with Thunder so he won't be lonely," she explained with the pure logic of childhood. Thunder seemed to understand the significance of the gesture. He gently nuzzled the stuffed horse, accepting the gift with dignity. William carefully attached Sparkles to Thunder's bridle, next to Carlos's drawing. The sight of this magnificent military horse decorated with children's gifts became the defining image of the day that changed everything. Forever. 6 months after that extraordinary morning at the palace, the ripple effects continued to spread in ways no one could have predicted. The story of the royal guards and their horses showing such tender care for special needs children had traveled around the world, inspiring similar acts of kindness and changing perspectives about disability, service, and human connection. Captain. Morrison sat in his office reviewing a stack of letters that had arrived from around the globe. Children with disabilities, their families, educators, and military personnel from dozens of countries had written to express how deeply the story had affected them. One letter particularly moved him. It was from a young girl in Australia named Sophie, who had cerebral palsy and had seen the videos online. She wrote in careful, determined handwriting, "Dear Captain Morrison, watching Thunder be nice to the kids made me feel brave. I joined my school's riding program and now I have a horse friend named Star. Thank you for showing that different is beautiful." The palace had received over 50,000 similar messages. More importantly, the incident had sparked a global movement. Military units around the world had begun reaching out to special needs organizations in their communities, creating partnerships that brought joy to children while enriching the lives of service members. William had become something of an international celebrity, though he remained deeply humble about his role in the events. Thunder, now permanently equipped with a special bridle that could hold small gifts from visiting children, had become the most photographed horse in royal service. Emma, the little girl whose love for horses had started it all, had been invited back to the palace several times. Each visit reinforced the bond between her and Thunder, and her confidence had grown remarkably. Her teachers reported significant improvements in her social skills and academic performance. Meeting Thunder taught Emma that she matters, her mother explained to reporters. When someone that important treated her with such kindness, it changed how she sees herself. The palace had officially established the Special Hearts Program, a monthly initiative that brought children with various disabilities to meet the guards and their horses. What had started as an unplanned moment of compassion had evolved into a structured program that served dozens of children each month. Dr. Sarah Chen, a researcher studying the therapeutic effects of human-animal interactions, had been granted permission to study the program's impact. Her preliminary findings were remarkable. "We're seeing measurable improvements in communication, social interaction, and emotional regulation among the children who participate," she reported to palace officials. "The combination of the majestic setting, the disciplined yet caring guards, and the gentle horses creates a uniquely powerful therapeutic environment." Guard Sullivan and Majesty had developed their own special relationship with the program participants. Rebecca, the girl who had braided Majesty's mane that first day, had become a regular visitor. She had learned to braid increasingly complex patterns and had taught other children the skill, creating a tradition that Majesty seemed to genuinely enjoy. "Majesty knows when it's Special Hearts Day," Sullivan observed. "She stands differently, more patient and alert. It's like she understands her job is different on those days." The program had also transformed the guards themselves. Many reported that their service felt more meaningful and connected to its original purpose of protecting and serving the people. The rigid military structure remained, but it was now infused with a deeper understanding of what true service looked like. Lieutenant Wells had been promoted partly based on her sensitive handling of that first extraordinary day. She had become the program coordinator, working with schools and organizations to schedule visits while ensuring that the guards' primary duties weren't compromised. "The children give us as much as we give them," she often told visitors. "They've taught us about courage, joy, and finding beauty in unexpected places." Sir Edmund's decision to embrace and expand the program rather than suppress it had earned him recognition from the highest levels of government. The Special Hearts program had become a source of national pride, demonstrating that tradition and innovation could work together to serve humanity. The international media attention had brought unexpected benefits. Donations poured in from around the world to support special needs education programs. The palace redirected all donations to schools and organizations serving children with disabilities, ensuring that the program's impact extended far beyond the palace walls. Mark, the thoughtful young man who had thanked Captain Morrison so eloquently, had enrolled in a leadership program for young people with intellectual disabilities. He credited his interaction with the Royal Guards as the moment he first believed he could make a difference in the world. "Captain Morrison treated me like my thoughts mattered," Mark explained to his counselors. "If someone that important could listen to me, maybe other people would too." The horses themselves had become celebrities in their own right. Thunder, Majesty, and Royal received fan mail from children worldwide. The palace had created a special program where children could send drawings and letters to the horses, and the guards would respond with photos and messages. Jennifer, the young photographer who had documented that first magical morning, had received a scholarship to study photojournalism in college. Her images from that day had been exhibited in galleries and had won several awards for their powerful portrayal of human dignity and connection. "Those pictures changed my life," she said in interviews. "They showed me that the most important stories are often about ordinary people doing extraordinary things." The program had also inspired changes in other areas of palace operations. Tours now included information about the Special Hearts program, and visitors frequently asked about participating or supporting similar initiatives in their own communities. Captain Morrison often reflected on how a single moment of choosing compassion over protocol had created such far-reaching change. The decision to allow that first interaction to continue had challenged everything he thought he knew about leadership and service. "Those children taught us that the highest form of discipline isn't rigid adherence to rules," he would tell officer candidates who came to study the program. "It's the wisdom to know when breaking those rules serves a greater good." The story had become part of military leadership curricula in several countries, studied as an example of adaptive leadership and emotional intelligence in action. But for those who lived it, the academic analysis mattered less than the simple, human truth it represented. Emma, now 8 years old, still visited Thunder regularly. She had learned to ride and had become an advocate for therapeutic riding programs. Her stuffed horse Sparkles remained permanently attached to Thunder's bridle, a symbol of the connection that had started it all. During one recent visit, Emma asked Thunder, "Do you remember the day we first met?" Thunder's response, a gentle nuzzle and soft wicker, suggested that he remembered everything about that magical morning when protocol gave way to compassion, when duty expanded to include kindness, and when a group of special children and their equally special horses proved that the greatest service comes from simply treating each other with love. The Special Hearts program continued to grow, touching thousands of lives and inspiring similar programs worldwide. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been: a simple recognition that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, respect, and kindness, regardless of their differences. The Royal Guards and their horses had learned that their highest calling wasn't just to stand at attention and follow orders, but to serve with their hearts as well as their training. And in doing so, they had created something far more valuable than perfect ceremony. They had created perfect moments of human connection that would last a lifetime,